Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We got Marcus Merrell, VP of Technology Strategy here at Sauce Labs. We got myself, Nikolay Advolodkin, Principal Developer Advocate. We're so excited to have you. And today we decided to do an impromptu live stream. We did a webinar, what was it, on Tuesday? And we had a bunch of questions that were not answered. And we want to spend a bunch of time answering a bunch of questions from that webinar and take any questions live from you all as well today. So feel free to drop them in the chat. Marcus, anything you want to say?
I don't know. I think this might be my first time on the test automation experience, I think. So people may have no idea who I am, which is like appropriate. Yeah, I'm the VP of Technology Strategy, Sauce Labs. I've been here for almost 5 years, and I've been in quality assurance for over 20 years. So been around a while. I've seen the evolution and in some cases the frustrating lack of evolution over the last 20 years, and have a few opinions, but we definitely want to take everyone's questions today and make sure that we get some good information out there. And it won't be like a Sauce Labs pitch or anything. We'll answer this question straight up as though we were members of the Selenium community as we were before we got here. So yeah, let's do it.
Absolutely. Let's do it, Marcus. Let's dive right in.
All right. Well, I got the first question for you from Anuj Subedi. How do I show the effectiveness of my test automation in the company I work in? So like ROI, how do we show that it works?
I'm just going to throw this up on the screen. So showing the ROI of test automation. That's a interesting and hard challenge because quality assurance, its very nature is preventing risk. So it's almost like, how do you answer how much money you saved for a company by preventing bugs? I prevented $5 million worth of bugs. How do you quantify that? It's tough. It is tough. Some ways that I find it valuable to show the progress automation is helping to make is decreasing the time to market of a feature, right? And if from its inception all the way to the time that it makes it to production, is automation helping to decrease that entire window? Mean time to recovery as well. That's another good metrics to track for the entire organization, but you can use also automation and plug that in and start monitoring that metric to see if mean time to recovery can increase, right? Maybe nowadays you have a bug and it takes you days or weeks to have a fix for that bug. With automation, it might decrease to something much faster. Let me see if I can think of some other ways. Another cool way that it's not really an objective way to measure ROI, but I found it's a cool, maybe collaborative like culture shift is automation engineers can bring QA teams and dev teams together, ultimately being a bridge between the two silos that were established historically. And so I think if you can show that to your management and your leaders, that you are there making the QA team and the dev team collaborate, even though that's hard to measure, that's palpable and you can feel and see collaboration. And of course, most organizations like to see that collaboration. Marcus, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, to your point, it's not always objective, and we've been searching for years. How do we get this some number or some set of numbers that we can look at that represent? Okay, now I've got quality, and it's really hard. I think it's also a little bit context dependent on where you are. I mean, it's really funny to take your example of I prevented $5 million worth of bugs. Like probably just about anyone in QA could make that claim, because as we know, the cost of a defect increases greatly as you go through the software development lifecycle. So once you release a bug to production, it might cause millions of dollars worth of damage, and you caught it the day it was introduced, and it didn't even, it barely made it through the build pipeline, and you caught it. And you're like, you could say right then, I saved $5 million. We're just right there with that one bug. But really, did you? I mean, that's the question. Like in that way, every QA person is worth millions and millions. So sure, I'd love to go with that, but I think people are asking us to justify things that I feel like betray the fact that they don't really understand our true value. They want objective numbers when there's plenty of parts of the organization that can't produce objective numbers on what every individual does, including engineering. So I would say the way I would demonstrate my effectiveness to the company would be to make sure people see visibly when we do catch a bug that, or when we catch something right before it goes into production, when you have one of those hero moments where you catch a bug that's super critical or obviously would have impacted revenue, that kind of thing. To find, I guess the only silver bullet I've got is agree on something with your management beforehand and work toward that goal, as long as that goal is reasonable and not stupid. Like 100% code coverage is kind of a dumb way to measure quality, because it's not a proxy for quality. It doesn't tell you anything about quality. It only tells you what work is remaining to be done. So I'm going to switch glasses real quick because I just realized you can't see my eyes at all. I'm going to switch it up. Anyway, that's my thoughts. We could probably have a whole broadcast episode about that.
Quick question, Marcus. Your opinion on this? How do you feel about using automation test runtime to reduce manual testing effort? Right? Like if you compare, hey, it takes a manual testing team 100 hours to execute this suite of tests versus automation, it takes 10 minutes. How do you feel like using that as a metric for ROI?
I mean, I think it's pretty good. It's truth. It's taking an objective measure of how long it takes to run tests manually. It disregards the fact that manual testing also picks up things along the way that automation in some cases can't pick up. Like when you're doing manual testing, you're seeing stuff all over the place that automation can't see unless you train it to see it. And most of the time you don't, unless you're doing something like visual testing. But I mean, it's true. It's an objective measure. And I think that can be, you can then say, well, it's not just that I've saved you 100 hours by going from 100 hours to 10 minutes. It's also that I can do this 10 minutes anytime you ask. I can do it 50 times a day. I can do it on every single browser, every single platform. And so I can scale. That's how you scale. And so that's as long as those 100 test cases are actually relevant and valid and valuable and stable and reliable and performant, and they follow your autonomous rules. I think that's probably a good step, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Cool. Thank you. Great points, Marcus. I got a question for you.
Yeah.
From Priyanka Koparkar. What types of tests should not be automated?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I kind of have a mental laundry list, but I'm sure this is going to be incomplete, and I'd love to get your thoughts. I fundamentally don't believe that you should test two-factor authentication with automation or CAPTCHA, that kind of thing. I don't believe that you should employ automation to get around fundamental security practices that were invented specifically to make automation impossible. Like it not only defeats the purpose of the security, but it's also really, really hard. And you end up spinning your wheels testing something that has nothing to do with your company. Your company didn't write the CAPTCHA code. You didn't write the OAuth, the authentication. You didn't write any of that code. So you need to instrument the application so that you can bypass that in a test and lower environment and do some moderate testing of it when you get into production. But it is a waste of time to test that stuff, yourself. That's one example. What do you got?
That's a good example, Marcus. I want to tackle it from a different perspective, not just tech related, but from a test strategy perspective, right? If you imagine you have a suite of tests that you may or may not want to automate, I would evaluate those tests based on how critical are they to the business. Um, do they all have to be executed through the UI? Can some of them be
Yeah.
done as through the API unit layer? Um, have they been a previous bug before?
Mhm.
How fast is it to automate these tests? How much effort will it take? How fast will they execute? How stable will they be? And so applying that kind of matrix of thinking, if we have like a suite of 100 tests, probably a lot of them I would not automate through the UI because most of them wouldn't meet the criteria of needing to be done through the UI. Now I would try to come up with a great strategy of which tests am I going to do through the API. Those will be fantastic tests. Unit tests, we can do those as well. Combination of API and unit tests, and then add some UI tests that actually meet like criteria of being valuable to the business, being fast to execute, being extremely stable, like greater than 99% pass rate stability. Um, that's how I would look
Yeah.
at that problem. And
Yeah.
there
And I
are,
think
and go ahead, Marcus.
just to help just determine some of this, I think I think I always like to ask myself one question when I'm automating a test, which is, if this test failed and it revealed a bug in the software, would we take action on it? Would we stop the shipment? Would we stop release? Or would we just be like, non-critical, priority 5 won't fix? Because if that's true, then there's no point. There's no point in having that in your arsenal, taking up time and adding uncertainty to everything.
That's a beautiful question, Marcus. Does that also apply to manual tests? Because what I found a lot of times is that from an automation side, when we're trying to automate some of these manual tests and we ask which ones are critical and high priority, a lot of times many of them will be classified as critical and high priority, which I don't know if I agree with that
Yeah.
categorization.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of manual testing, if it's done well, it's going to be exploratory in nature, and it's going to be determining things that are sort of you figure out on the fly, and you really take the direction of where you're going, and you need to hit certain metrics, certain pages, certain workflows. Um, I'd be hard pressed to say that if you actually have time, that any amount of manual testing would be wasted effort, because you're always getting a whole lot of signals in when you're doing manual testing. I'm just not sure I would prioritize it or hold up the release if it's not done. I guess that's what I would say. Another kind of testing that I think you should not automate is if you are automating something that hits a third-party API like PayPal or Twitter, X, or eBay, or if you're doing something in your software that you tests the accessibility screen reader. And I've heard a lot of people say it, I want to test the screen reader. And my answer is like, okay, Apple created the screen reader. Pretty sure the Apple screen reader works okay. What you're trying to test is whether or not your app is instrumented properly to be read by the screen reader, which can be done without actually invoking the screen reader. You can do that by just testing the instrumentation using a scan of like the Axe Core toolset. So be very careful. At one point, I remember writing a unit test. Oh my God, I didn't even want to admit this. I wrote a unit test once that tried to trip up the thread.sleep function call in Java. Like, what? Why in the heck am I testing Java libraries? Like, this is not my job. So don't test. Be very careful about testing stuff to make sure that you're not actually trying to test PayPal. It's not your job.
Those are great points, Marcus. Another one that I would add as well is file uploads and downloads.
Yeah.
Those we find people try to do through the UI, but the file upload and download process is an API process. And ultimately, the outcome of the goal of those tests is what you really want to determine is was the file uploaded to the right place, which is a web request, and will the file be downloaded if I perform another web request? And so those are just two web requests. that produce two different bodies, two different responses that you get back. And based on that, you can check whether you can do a file upload and download versus trying to use the browser's native functionality to actually upload and download a file, as Marcus was talking about. That functionality was developed by the browser, and they tested it for us. And so we don't need to go through that same process and repeat that.
Yeah. I think about that a lot when I think about the split between API testing and UI testing, which is that if you're doing API testing, for the most part, you're sending REST or GraphQL commands to the API and it's returning the result. And it's very pure relationship between those two things. Whereas if you do UI testing, you are adding client-side code that your team wrote, but you're also adding in Chrome driver, the Selenium WebDriver libraries, the load balancing software that Amazon uses or whatever, like all this entire ecosystem of millions of lines of code that your team is not responsible for is now going into effect. Now, you need to make sure your stuff works with that, but you don't need to spend all of your time on it. You just need to make sure that a few tests can demonstrate that the UI can render the outputs of all these different signals, and then the rest, business logic, it's all through the API.
Yeah,
so this will lead to our next question, because I want to ask you a question that we could probably spend the entire rest of the hour and probably day on. And I thought of an interesting use case, and I want to pose it to you. What is a good place to start for AI test automation?
Before I
Uh-oh, your audio has cut out for me.
Hey, Marcus, can you hear me?
Now I can.
Oh, awesome. Everything. Okay, cool. Sorry about that. Maybe a little disruption in service. Matt asking, will the session be available later? Yeah, absolutely. This is a live stream now, but will be available LinkedIn and YouTube and Twitter. So you can definitely catch it later. And then Matthew asks another question. Would it be good to mock the responses from third-party calls to ensure the application is working correctly?
Yeah. In fact, I don't know if this is still true, but I know that at one point the AWS SDK actually released a set of mock Java classes specifically to do that. I wholeheartedly think that that's a very good thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely, because you want to have that determinability in your tests, right? And you don't want third-party API calls changing the state of your system to be dynamic in a way that may or may not fail your tests.
I mean, I would even apply that to internal teams that are doing microservices that you depend on. So you mock out those microservices, but so it's interesting. You kind of build a wall around yourself, but you also still hold the other teams accountable. You have a contract test that makes sure the microservice team's API still works the way it's supposed to. And then you have a mock internally to guarantee that your stuff won't be messed up if their stuff is broken.
Cool. Yeah, Matthew, if you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to ask. All right, Marcus, back to your question, which was, where's a good place to start for AI test automation? So I don't know here if you mean to test an AI system or to use AI to test a system. I'm going to go with using AI to help enable us, assist us to test the system. I think a good place to start is probably the most popular tool, ChatGPT. You can go there and explore some of its capabilities. Some of its capabilities that I found have been helpful for me. If you give it some background information about what you're trying to do, your team, the application you're testing, maybe some constraints you have, it can help you to generate a test plan, a test strategy. It can help you to generate test cases, actually. If you go in and say, I have this URL, give me API tests, it will generate you like 20 API tests that are totally valid, because those are super common, right? I can do a get and get a 200. I can do this and get a 404 and so on, right? That's another great way. What else? If you have access to the source code, keep in mind you don't want to upload private source code to ChatGPT, but if you don't mind uploading source code to ChatGPT, it can write you tests if it has some context. It's AI, it's not perfect. Always have to validate the work that it does, but it can give you a great start.
Yeah. I what I did the first time I sat down with ChatGPT was I asked it to write a Selenium test to, search on Google, and then I asked it to do another one that would get as close as possible to check out a product from Amazon.com, but not actually buy it. And the cool thing was that that's not how I started. I actually said, "How do you do this thing to buy a product on Amazon?" And it said, "I'll give you the script up to that. Don't buy something on Amazon with a test. That's inappropriate." I thought that's awesome. And then I said, okay, so let's make this now into this, take the same Selenium script and make it into a page object model. And it broke it up. Tests here, page object here, classes pointed to each other. This is in Java. And then I said, okay, let's take this page object model now and make it into BDD syntax. And it did it really, really well in using declarative syntax that actually is the way you should do BDD and not the bad way you people try to do it a lot of the time, which is to say, in your BDD syntax to actually say things like click this button and enter text into this text field, which we could go off on a tangent about that. But like, if you prompt it right, it's going to give you some really good answers. But last night I was musing on this topic with Titus, who I think people know. And I thought of something, and I would love to try this. And I think it's going to work. I think it's going to work beautifully. Imagine you're running like a Chrome test, a web test, or a mobile test or something like that. And you go to the network tab and you get the network and you download that as a HAR file. So you're getting all of the HTTP requests that the browser is making to the backend servers and the APIs and everything. I want to feed that HAR file into ChatGPT, and I want to say, now build me a set of tests that will replicate the API calls to this particular endpoint, and go through and convert this session into an API test that would hit the back end. And I have a feeling that's going to work. I haven't done it yet, but sometime in the next couple of weeks, I want to try that because I think it's going to work. I think it's going to work beautifully. And I think you can then build it into like a library very easily of how to manipulate the data in your app so you can set up data for testing that you can launch into a session and then set these. I mean, I think it's a really exciting way to look at things.
That's a super cool idea, Marcus. I also agree that I think it'll work. And Marcus was talking about writing a Selenium test and modifying it in different ways. I actually, in the beginning, when ChatGPT came out, I created a YouTube tutorial where I did a bunch of similar stuff that Marcus was talking about. I just dropped a link into the chat for you all. Take a watch to see how you can get started with AI test automation. All right.
Cool.
Next question is for you, Marcus.
All right.
It's a longer one. Let me grab it from here. Paste it in.
Okay.
It doesn't look like it doesn't all fit. All right.
Right.
How do you help to support a QA director from an internal selling perspective to convince their leadership that investing in automation will provide value to their business if they already consider QA to be expendable in the first place?
I first, once again, another hour-long topic. I feel like it would be good to interrogate why QA is considered expendable, because I'm not going to argue with that. Like there's a lot of that going around right now, and it's devastating. I think part of the reason QA is considered expendable, especially like for a long time, it was like, we want to get rid of manual testing and replace it with automation. And now they're like, well, automation didn't work either. Get rid of all of it. And I kind of think that it's because we tried sort of the everything in the kitchen sink when it came to automation. Like, I know I have been responsible for the first part of my career, for a lot of really bloated, unreliable, long-running test suites, even when we got them running in parallel, I remember no matter what we do, we couldn't get it to where, our pass rate was 100%. We'd always got, where there were 10 failures and then there were 8 failures and then there were 10 again. And we would analyze these and we'd fix them and all that stuff. And I bet you money that if I went back in time now to 2010 when I was doing this, I bet you those tests that we were running they wouldn't have stopped the release anyway. So why bother people? Why distract people with these failures? Because all it does is cost you reputation. One of the coolest test talks I ever heard was a very, very, very famous e-commerce company, not one that I worked for. I did work for a famous one. They said that they had 7 Selenium tests that would gate the release. And they basically figured out what are the 7 things that have to work every single time we ship this software. And if anything else breaks, we will roll back, fix forward, do what we do, but it's lower priority and it's not going to tank our revenue. And I think to me, that's the best thing you can do, is slim down your test suite to minimum what is going to keep the lights on and make those tests so rock solid that nobody can argue with them. And it seems like at first you're thinking, well, that means I'm doing less work and I can't justify the value of all this work. But it's like, that work probably wasn't relevant, and maybe they were right that we're expendable. That's a rough thing to hear. I've been in that situation so many times. It's crazy. So I once talked to a guy who had 15,000 test cases and 4,000 of them failed every single day. And I'm like, your tests are worthless, man. And he knew it. Tests are worthless. Slim down to where the only thing you're providing is value. And when something breaks, there's an action you can take on it. And when you get to that point where your builds are trustworthy, people will sort of magically start paying attention and start looking up when the build turns red, because there's a good chance it revealed a bug. So that's sort of my take, is prove relevance by doing fewer tests far more often and make sure they count, every single one of them.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, Marcus. To me, I also like to think about it from another perspective, which is if we believe that QA is not providing value to the business or automation, why is that the case? And what is providing value to the business? Why is it that the business seems like, and probably is true, will prefer to hire developers over QA, or when there is a pandemic, they'll lay off QA teams and keep on the majority of developers? Well, it's because, in my opinion, developers release features can generate revenue. And so if the ultimate goal of pretty much any business is to generate revenue, then the question that comes back to me as a contributor is, how do I enable the business to better generate revenue? And that means that I need to better enable my software engineering team to release features. And so if we can create the environment where we can release features faster, where we can have less downtime, where our features can have less bugs, where our features can be more enjoyed by users, those are the areas I would focus my activities on, and those are the metrics that I would try to track, and then show my value that, hey, me being part of this team, we're now able to release a feature every single day. We can do it within 30 minutes of some exploratory testing. We have automated tests that validate things are working, and we can release a feature every single day, versus before we were doing it every 2 weeks and bug fixes were taking 10 days.
Yeah. And usually when you're in that situation where bug fixes take forever, it's not helped by the fact that your automation suite is kind of unreliable and doesn't really give you much signal. Like once that automation test case suite is whittled down to, like, we know that when it says it's green, it's actually green. Like it just transforms the culture of your dev environment. It's kind of crazy. So there's a question about, does that include manual tests? I have the beginnings of a perspective on that, because that definitely introduces some new variables. What do you think, Nikolay?
In terms of
In
which
terms
part?
of like justifying the existence of manual testers, that kind of thing.
I tend to believe that the most optimal engineering teams will do their own software development and automated testing and slight exploratory testing. From what I've seen when I talk to organizations, when I've had Simon Stewart on the test automation experience, who's worked at Facebook, Google, Apple, they don't have manual testers. They're engineers that will write code. They'll write the test for the code. They'll manage the test for the code, and they can release to production hundreds of times per day. And so that's the model that I believe works the best. And so to me, having huge manual testing teams does seem a waste of resources.
I
What do you think, Marcus?
I know everyone hates it when you say it depends, but I think it depends. So for context, Simon Stewart's experience is Google, Facebook, and Apple,
Yeah.
where they have a completely different kind of development culture that most people can't really even fathom. They release software every 9 seconds. I think that if you're in a company that's smaller, most of my career has been spent in small to mid, 200 to 1,000 employees. And I think that combination, really the main thing I would look at is what vertical am I in? What industry vertical am I in? We were talking about this last night, and I think we're going to publish some thought leadership on this at some point soon, because I think it's really interesting. If you work for an e-commerce company where the user experience is the most important thing, I would absolutely hire manual testers to make sure that user experience is delightful from a subjective point of view. And since I don't have the scale of Facebook, and I can't rely on 10 million visitors seeing an A/B test and giving me valid signal on that within 15 seconds, I can't do that. So I'm going to have to rely on some subjective opinions from manual testers. Another example on the other end of it is I work for a company that has, let's just say Anthem insurance coverage. I can't leave Anthem. I'm married to Anthem. It doesn't matter what my user experience is. You probably don't need someone validating that user experience. I'm locked in. I'm sticky. I have to be loyal because I have to be loyal. You need to make sure as a tester that claims can be filed, payments can be issued, and that the business and the revenue flow appropriately. But user experience, I'm sorry, like you should care about it. You probably don't need to care about it very much. Can claims get processed? Are people prevented from doing what they want to do? Maybe you don't need so many manual testers in that situation. What do you think?
I think you make fantastic points, Marcus. And to the audience watching, please share your thoughts. We would love to hear them and answer any questions, thoughts you have.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think you bring great points, Marcus. Yeah.
Give me somewhat uncomfortable opinions. Like, I never in my QA career did I ever say, let's just not worry about the UX here. But like, it's not critical to your business. Users are going to be, banks are kind of similar. You got to worry about that a little bit. Banks are harder to leave than social media apps are actually pretty hard to leave. Banks are harder to leave than a game. You can switch from one travel app to another pretty quickly. So you got to worry about UX. But in a lot of cases, I hate to say it, but you probably don't.
You've convinced me, Marcus. I have taken on your view. You're right. It's a great perspective that I've never thought about. You're right. The vertical really does make a difference.
And what I see in the industry and in our customer base is that people take the test strategy that they brought with them from their previous employer, regardless of industry vertical, regardless of tech stack, and they say, I'm going to do this. And I've done this before. I went from a SaaS-based, complicated app that did HR tech management to B2C e-commerce, millions of users that had a much, much simpler workflow. And I brought the same philosophy with me from one to the next. And it was a terrible idea. I mean, we did good work and we prevented bad things from happening, but we way overbloated the test cases because we didn't look to protect the right thing. Yeah.
It seems like it again kind of comes back to the idea where whatever company you join, figure out the business that they're in, figure out how the revenue is generated, figure out where that value to the user comes from, and based on that, among other factors, create a test strategy that supports the business versus just, as you said, bringing a default test strategy to every single vertical.
Yeah, I think we're going to produce some content on this because it's kind of a new strain of thought we've been having lately, and I think people aren't talking about this, and I really want to start this conversation in the industry because I think it can help us to answer why is QA so much at risk of being downsized or eliminated. I think it's because this kind of thing hasn't really been in the general conversation.
Yeah, great points, Marcus.
Yeah.
Got a comment here from Jason Baum, our host of the Test Case Scenario podcast, where Marcus, myself, and Evelyn Coleman frequently visit. Go check that out. He says that, Marcus, your background is fire.
No, yeah, it's real. We're lucky. I mean, this is a little rental unit, but it's not a fake background.
Awesome. Marcus, you want to keep going with?
Yeah.
Is it I think you asked me the question now.
Yeah, that's right. So Michael Sibug asks, is there a ratio to number of testers to developer? And so goes to automation testers to manual testers. I'm curious. Yeah.
I think no and no. It depends.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can. The technology landscape mixed with company culture, mixed with company goals, it's too hard to put a hard ratio on this kind of thing. And so I think you gotta get into the environment, figure out what's going on, and based on that, you'll figure out how many testers are needed for developers. Sometimes you'll join a team where the developers love to test and want to help you to test and need your help to help them to test. And so you'll need a lot less manual testers there. Sometimes you'll get amazing automation rock stars that know exactly what they're doing. They have 10, 15 years of experience, have ruined automation at many companies, and come to a new company and know all the mistakes they've made, and they can automate for an entire team. They can help manual testers test. They can help developers test. Other times, that's not the case. What are your thoughts, Marcus?
I tend to agree. I feel like there was always this, I think at Microsoft Legend has it, there was a 2-to-1 tester to developer ratio back in the 90s, 80s, 90s. I think it's to me, the question is a little bit like saying, should I have 800 tests without even knowing what company they work for? It's just odd to me to approach things that way. Although I know that it happens. I would love to see. I think that you're not going to be hurt by having a large QA to developer ratio. I just don't think it's realistic to expect any company to stick that. I've never worked for a company that increased that ratio. They always decreased it. So it's basically like, how little testing can we do and get away with it? And what I'm basically trying to do is kind of lean in with that and say, well, if that's what we're doing, then let's at least make sure that we continue to be relevant within that world. So we make sure we focus on priorities, make sure we can scale it right. And it's it's kind of a harsh reality. I don't love it, but I don't think there's a prescriptive ratio that I could recommend without knowing more. If you work for NASA, you need more testers than if you work for a small e-commerce startup.
This reminds me of another common poorly worded question, which is, what's the ratio of unit to integration to UI test that I should have in my automation pyramid, which is the same exact concept here. It depends on so many things. So
Matthew Keenum asks the question: how do you deal with people who want to blame QA when any bug happens, even if the bug is very low risk? I'm curious, Nikolay, what are your thoughts? I have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, this is a tough one. It's tough because QA is, in a lot of companies, right, the gatekeeper of quality, as though we are totally responsible for the outcome of the code, but then we also get put into constraints of, hey, the developer just spent 2 weeks developing this code, you get 1 day to test it, go. It's 4 p.m. on a Thursday, you have 1 day to test it, we're going to production on Friday, go.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
There definitely should not be a blame. It should be, whatever company we work for, we're all striving for the same exact thing. We want the company to succeed in whatever products or goods is generating, so that it can make more money, so that we can have great career success and prosper those companies. So we're all on the same team: the developers, the testers, our project managers. So if anyone gets the blame, it should be the team. There should be a retrospective done to understand what happened, why did it happen. Let's make sure it doesn't happen again. And the other part that I don't like about this, or blame in general, is that when humans are involved, we're not perfect. We're not machines that don't make mistakes. We make mistakes all the time. And so I think it's a sucky culture to have when people get attacked for the mistakes that they are bound to make. Instead, it's better to create an environment of learning from your mistakes, and growing from there.
Yeah. I think some of this comes from context, some of this comes from history. I guess my glib, flippant response that I have trotted out on occasion is, yes, I agree with you. I am responsible for every single bug that I coded into this application, which is zero. No QA person ever wrote the code that is responsible for a bug. I mean, unless they're actually the one doing the testing, right? I mean, that's kind of a flippant answer, but it sort of points back to, this is a team exercise. This is a team thing. If you need a scapegoat, then we can talk about that. But if it's a massive major bug and they're going to blame the person on the team who probably it gets paid the lowest and has the lowest amount of technical skills compared to the engineers that are on the team, that's toxic. If you're being blamed because, so I will say one thing: if you're being blamed because you have a bloated Selenium test suite with 800 tests that 50% of which fail every day, and you're not testing cross-platform and you're not testing in parallel, and everything you do takes 6 months, it's harder to defend yourself against that. I'm still not gonna say you're responsible. You still didn't write the code. I'm just saying it's harder to defend against that. The way I have always approached every QA job I've had starting in 1999 was to earn my credibility as a technical person, like a technical resource, to earn my credibility on the first day on the job. And I've been lucky enough, I think every QA job I've ever had, I've found a bug on day 1 or day 2. And not only do I report the bug with perfect steps to reproduce in screenshots and highlights, but I also identify the place in the code that actually produced this defect. I go deep on it. And if you have access to the code, you have access to this. Not everyone can do that, but this is also a place where ChatGPT can help. I would just say, earn your credibility, so that it would be really hard for someone to really think, oh, it was carelessness, or this person didn't intend well, or something like that. Earn your credibility, defend yourself, and point out the fact that this is a team setting, and I didn't write that code. Everyone is responsible for it. All right, so I got a little ranty there.
That was fantastic, Marcus. I think your answer is wonderful. Jason Baum asks, it's a question. There's such an undercurrent that QA is going away, whether it be layoffs or shift left. We just hear that a lot. What do you both think about that? Is there truth to it, or is it exaggerated?
I think there's truth to it. I think there's unavoidable truth to it, and I've been trying to do kind of a lot of looking within, a lot of soul searching to find out, like, is it something we've done as a QA industry? Is it something that executives are doing? And I think I think the answer is kind of both. Like all this stuff we talk about, bloated, inconsistent test suites. We took sometimes the wrong tool to apply to the wrong situation, and overdid it, trying to achieve a coverage number that wasn't relevant to the business, and didn't prove our value by making sure that that we were the arbiters of truth for the build. Because when you have a failing test suite, you really can't make any declarative statements about the quality of the product at all. What I want to be able to say is, a developer makes a commit. I run, let's say 10 tests, let's say 30 tests, each of which take 2 to 3 minutes on every single browser, every single mobile app out there. Since I'm running them at scale and I've done everything Nikolay always recommends, they run in less than 5 minutes. And in 5 minutes, I have a set of tests that have been repeated on multiple platforms that tell me the critical flows of this business are safe. Anything else that happens, let's make sure it's behind a feature flag. We can roll it back quickly, and let's ship this product. And if you can start doing that 20 times a day or whenever you need to, everything changes and you make yourself more relevant. So I think it's true, and I think there's things that we need to do about it starting 3 years ago.
And that's why we're here having this conversation now, and we'll continue to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Great question, Jason.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm going to skip around here a tiny bit more. Let's see. I'm sorry. There's one question. It's really, really long, and I'm not sure I think it's all that important. Automation quality is a team effort. What suggestions do you have to other engineers? So the first question was to the director level. How do you make suggestions to other engineers to understand the value of automation and quality? And I think we've sort of hit on this a little bit, but it says, I find it to be a big hurdle as shifting left tends to add a significant culture shift. So how do we get QA to participate in shift left without feeling threatened by the motion? And is the answer eventually work yourself into a development role, or what do you think?
Where do you see that question?
Sorry, I sort of altered the question from number 7.
Yeah.
Sort of going on the fly here. So how do I work with devs better? Because in the culture that blames QA for everything, there's a siloed culture. How do I break down those silos? And then how do I help shift left without my job being eliminated by the motion of shifting left?
Fantastic questions. I've learned some of this throughout my career. It starts with collaborating with the team, right? It starts with, as we talked about, creating a blameless culture, realizing that we're all on the same ship, headed in the same exact direction. We can either fight each other or we can work together and collaborate. And I find that in our world, collaboration is pretty much always better than any kind of competition. So you collaborate with the developers, right? At one of my first roles, I was an automation engineer working with a team of developers. What we were doing together was basically sitting down, talking about the features that they created and where they thought there were areas of weakness that might need some testing. I would suggest some testing as well, ask some questions that potentially they were like, oh, that's a good question. Yeah, let me think about that, or I didn't even think about that kind of edge case. So it can start with that level of collaboration. Then kind of, as we already talked about, as you develop your automation suite and prove that it's absolutely rock solid, that it's covering the valuable features, you can now start helping the developers. A lot of developers still want to do their own CI/CD, for example, especially at larger orgs or even medium-sized orgs. And so picking up CI/CD is something that is not too difficult. Documentation on it nowadays is pretty fantastic. Tons of YouTube tutorials. Pick it up and put your test into a CI/CD pipeline. Make sure that it's extremely stable. Add it to the code that your devs are deploying. And now, magically, the developers will get a green check mark or an X that appears on their commits as they push it up to the repo. And they'll love that, especially if the tests are valuable. And so now you've integrated yourself into the dev team. You're becoming valuable. And then at some point, yeah, and you just keep scaling that, keep growing and scaling that, adding more tests, making your CI faster. And I think that relationship will continue to prosper. What do you
Picking up
think, Marcus?
skills like Docker along the way and shell scripting and stuff like that, picking up sort of the regular tool bag for a DevOps engineer. I mean, one thing that I've considered in the past is, should I at least plan for, if the doomsayers are right and QA does sort of go away as a profession, which, you know, I'm waiting 20 years being told that was going to happen imminently. Pick up skill sets along the way that sort of help you succession plan your own career. Like Docker is a great example. Docker, containerization, Kubernetes, mass deployment of servers in an ephemeral environment. Nikolay's suggestion of learning CI/CD tools is brilliant, spot on. When I first started doing CI/CD, the QA and my company actually owned the process of it, and we were instrumental to the company. So I also like the idea of picking up other things like security testing, accessibility testing, performance testing, load testing, that kind of thing. I think all these skill sets help endear you to the developers, because a lot of people are being asked to do that kind of stuff, and it's always a side job, except maybe security. So like anything you can pick up along the way will both help you endear yourself to the team and make yourself more critical, and help the shift left process in a way that doesn't exclude you, but it also helps you if one day QA is just like, they just blanket eliminate QA and you have to go find another gig. Well, you probably could branch out into something else if you want to.
That's so funny you say that, Marcus. I was going to suggest the same thing. And the cool part about all the other types of tests that Marcus mentioned, number one, we don't only need to do browser-based black box testing. Doing accessibility testing, front-end performance, security, visual testing, all of those are actually very easy to pick up and automate. And most of them are extremely valuable and reliable just because of the way that they work.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that most of the software defects that have made a lot of headlines recently, like the Taylor Swift incident around the ticketing company, the airlines issues that have gone on, most of these have more to do with performance and load testing than they do with functional testing. I think the air traffic controller issue recently was functional, but I think for the most part, performance and load testing is what's bringing sites down right now more than functional. So any direction you can go with there, that should be a part of quality assurance. It always should have been part of quality assurance, but for some reason it sort of hasn't been in their purview as much as it should.
Cool. All right, I think we got 3 more minutes because Marcus and I will have to drop. Please share any questions you have. We'll get to them. Otherwise, we'll keep going through our list here. Let me ask you, Marcus, can you talk about some of the challenges related to AI ML testing?
Once again, we're assuming, is this testing an AI ML system, or is this using AI to supplement like your existing automation testing?
I think it's your choice.
Because I have almost no answers for how to test an AI system. We have a gentleman who works for Sauce Labs named Jim Whitehead, who's a professor at UC Santa Cruz, who is sort of the head of AI. I would ask him. We should probably have him on at some point and talk to him about how to do this kind of stuff, because I don't begin to know. The only way I would know how to test ChatGPT is if I enter anything, do I get a response or do I get an error? And I would just like, all right, cool, it works. The web part of it works. I mean, kind of pursuant to what we were talking about earlier, I would say start thinking of ChatGPT as an assistant that doesn't mind you being a little bit rude to it. Think of it as an extension of yourself. Think of it as something that can help fill in the blanks. Like, there's some parts of writing code that I enjoy that are toil that I actually kind of like doing. I actually like writing unit tests. But there's some stuff like learning new libraries. Like if I'm working on someone else's code and they interface with 6 different libraries, if I don't really want to thoroughly understand and read all the documentation for those libraries, I get ChatGPT to help me. I feed in the POM file and I say, help me understand, or here's this code that interacts with this library. What's it doing? And so getting it to help me with some stuff like that, it really multiplies me a lot. Like I said, I've been working on this side project for a few weeks now, and I think that I've spent 9 hours on it. And if I had if I had been doing this without ChatGPT, I think it would have taken at least 3 other people to help me get the same amount I got out of the 9 hours as I did out of just myself. So I think it really can be a multiplier to your own efforts in eliminating toil. I'm not really paying attention or acting on the whole fear of Skynet thing. Like, sure, that fear is out there, but I'm not using that as a reason to not use the tool. Like, the tool is actually legitimately helping me a lot in my daily job. So I would just say, get over any fear you have, understand the difference between a good prompt and a bad prompt, and understand also the limitations of AI in that it can give you terrible, terrible answers, and you really do need to still understand the difference. What do you think? I know you've done more work on this than I have.
No, sounds like you've used it a lot more to develop an application than I have. I've developed just one with it, and it sounds like mine was simple. We talked about it a little bit previously. I would just also add another great use of like ChatGPT or AI is converting from one programming language to another.
Because you
probably, yeah, if you've been in the industry, you probably know there are 2 really well documented programming languages, Java and JavaScript. And then everything else is kind of gets left behind. And so you'll find a lot of answers in Java, JavaScript. And if you might want to convert to a less popular programming language, C#, Ruby, Python obviously has been on the rise. You can use ChatGPT for that. And it's done a really good job of doing those conversions.
Yeah, that's a really great use case for that. And I know that some people, when they're starting out, they have trouble like switching between languages. I definitely do, and I always need help. And when I go long periods without writing any Java code, Java makes some iterations. It actually changes, and they introduced modules, they introduced streaming, they introduced all this stuff. I'm really caught up with it. So using ChatGPT to help me, okay, I can feed it some Java code and say, hey, modernize this to Java 17 for me, and it just does it. It's beautiful.
That's awesome. Yeah. Awesome. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our live stream and participating. It's been such a pleasure, Marcus. Thank you for joining and answering all of these questions live. We'll do this again sometime in the future. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
Yeah, awesome. Bye, everyone.
Bye.